All right, let's see. It says we're live. I am waiting for clarification. I'm in the live chat. Sorry about this, guys. We had some issues with the other software, so we are signed in here with Zoom. I'm waiting to see if it is popping up on the live feed on the channel. I think it might be a different link.
It looks to me to be the same link.
Oh, it's the same. Oh, shit. Shoot.
So.
I mean. All right.
now we're going to get censored.
All right. No, this is perfect. Then we don't have to try to redistribute the link while we're talking here. All right. So yes, guys. Shit. I'm off my game. Welcome back to Everything EOS, the longest running EOS podcast. I'm your host, Zack from Liquid Apps, Dappiness, Everything EOS. I am here with David Packham. I don't have your name in front of me. Is it Pac-Man or Pac-Man? Sorry.
No, it's Packham.
Packham. Wow. I messed it up. Your name on your screen. All right, so now I have my notes in front of me.
David P. That's just all
I am sorry, everybody, for being off my game. All right. I'm here with the CTO of Chintai, Phillip Hamnett, and David Packham, the CEO. I'm just going to stop talking here because I'm a little flustered. So I'll let you guys introduce yourself. I'll let David start. Introduce yourself. Phil, introduce yourself. And then let's just get into like high level, like what is Chintai for anyone who has been living under a rock for a year?
Which actually could be a lot of people.
Almost.
Yeah, exactly. I'm David Packham. So I co-founded EOS 42, one of the original block producers that launched the EOS mainnet. And as what sprung out of that was Chintai, which started off as a token leasing exchange to handle the on-chain resourcing for EOS itself, the CPU market. And from that, we built out an on-chain order management system. And from that, therefore, the whole project is sprung out from that as a project in its own right.
Yep, I'm Philip. I originally, before I entered the blockchain space, I was a physicist, and I did programming in data analysis. And I did that for many years. And then when I finished this, I was working for a subcontractor for Airbus, where I was doing embedded software systems for airplanes. And then, as luck would have it, David hired me to work on the Chintai project. Was one of the original developers on the original Chintai smart contract for EOS leasing. And since then I've been working on that and building out all of these new products with the rest of the team.
We were just talking before the show. I was looking into a little bit of both your backgrounds, and I asked Phil about the Monte Carlo simulations you did, because that's super interesting to me. Because were you using it in like a financial modeling, or were you using it for something else?
No, I was using it. So the project I was doing was about evacuation dynamics. So I had Monte Carlo simulations of cars in a city. And the question was, if there was some sort of like big emergency and like everyone had to evacuate an entire city for whatever reason, the question was, how would communication in like the modern era, so like people using Twitter and Facebook and their phones to tell others, don't go on the highway is completely jammed, for example. Like how would that affect the speed and the way in which people manage to escape the city?
Interesting.
Yeah, and so I had Monte Carlo simulations built out to simulate this for Manchester and Manhattan. I did it for Manchester and Manhattan. Yeah,
that's awesome, man. So the reason that struck a chord with me was because at the DAPP Network Hackathon, Team Vigor, which from Vigor DAC, which I'm a part of, they did a Monte Carlo simulation for financial modeling to model risk with financial markets. So I'm not super familiar with Monte Carlo, but I know the people who are working with it are much smarter than me, and they're all really, really good at math. And David, you just did something interesting. So outside of Chintai, you were just like what were you, like the interim CFO of Warbly, and you worked through what would you even call that with Warbly? Was that an acquisition?
Yeah, an acquisition, exactly. So yeah, I did kind of brush over my background, 20 years in financial services prior for a range of banks and things like that. That's actually been useful for a lot of what we're now doing with Chintai. It's effectively a decentralized finance project, and therefore that overlap is certainly helpful, I think, for us as a project to have someone with that kind of background involved as well, of course. But yeah, Warbly, I was asked to come in actually as an interim CFO. Dominic Thomas, the CEO and one of the co-founders, They had that kind of deal almost bubbling in the background in the pipeline. They needed to just do a wholesale review of their internal finances. What most people don't appreciate is that Worbly's been incredibly well set up from the start in terms of legals, and the way they handled every aspect of the token side of things, and locking down KYC and AML at the account level. Got a lot of flack for that, and it led to the token suffering from lack of liquidity because you couldn't trade it legally in terms of its, and so on. So that's been both a kind of blessing and a curse for it. But the reason, therefore, it's been bought out by an institutional buyer, Amazix Capital, is precisely because it's done so many things the right way, and can now be leveraged as a platform for bringing in all sorts of accredited investors and institutional buyers and so on to deploy security tokens, carry out issuances, and as a platform, a fundamental platform for regulated securities trading and other products like, say, I don't know, bonds, for example, that kind of stuff. Yeah, just as an example.
So that all ties in. I'm going to jump around the order of my topics here, but you guys just got a license. So are you in the process of getting your approval of the license in Singapore for a monetary authority of Singapore? Is that a money service license?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So it's the Monetary Authority of Singapore, or MAS. Yeah, we've been working with them for about 6 months now, and we were investigating first of all, and had really just assumed we'd need to go into their fintech sandbox. So for those not familiar with what that is, a sandbox is, as the name implies, a regulatory environment where you can deploy a product, especially something kind of newer, maybe a bit more experimental, and they can watch test markets actually being simulated, indeed with actual institutional clients and so on, and they can just watch it and make sure they're happy at a very small scale that this thing is operating as intended before they then give you the green light and say, right now, launch this out in the wild and scale it up. They actually decided, though, looking at the token control framework that's in place and the other regulatory aspects related to both Worbly and ourselves, that actually there were no concerns about us being compliant, and therefore just told us to bypass that and just apply for licensing and go. So that's actually been a great outcome for us. It's moved the whole roadmap forwards in terms of what we can achieve and when, which is great. So the application's underway. It typically takes about 3 months.
So what kind of opportunities does this license open up? I mean, getting that regulatory clarity is like the holy grail of pretty much.
I don't think, whether most people kind of understand it is quite a big deal. Absolutely. But what it means is that we're able to issue or at least handle for other clients the issuing of security tokens in a regulated environment. Actually, Amazix are oversighted by the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority out of London as well. So they will likewise have the opportunity to do that from oversight out of the UK as well. But it gives clients options, right? It depends where they're based in the world. It depends what kind of regulatory oversight they're happy with. They're actually both high quality regulators, pretty well oversighted. And all of this really is for me a precursor to the US, which is the SEC, for example. They just want to see this kind of thing up and running in another jurisdiction before they're going to be necessarily happy with expansion out into the US as well. But that's really what a lot of this is long term. If you look at the roadmap for us, part of the part of the plans for us.
That's funny. So you think basically, if there's success with this test market outside of the US, you're under the assumption that it will be relatively easy to get.
I would never say easy.
Yeah,
it's
easy. Yeah,
it's definitely feasible at that point. Absolutely. So we would likely be looking to partner with existing institutions already in the US rather than us apply for licensing. They can leverage Chintai and potentially Worbly as a chain to carry out the same activity that's ongoing elsewhere. Fully regulated, fully oversighted. The regulators can plug in and see all of the things like aspects like compliance reporting and so on in real time. So there's a lot of potential with all of this, but we are pretty, I think, diverging a bit in terms of where this is more where it's all potentially heading. I think,
You guys went under quite a transition over the last year. I think just even the stuff we just talked about for the last 5 minutes or so might be surprising to some people, because I think the general EOS community that hasn't been following your project over the last 6 months or so, they see you guys as just like a leasing platform. So that's how you guys got your start. Was
I think the common conception
the
is basically, oh, Shintai got killed by the Rex. That's it. That's how you sum up the project for a lot of people who are not familiar with what we were doing. Whereas actually, it's you remember EOS Weekly, right?
Oh yeah,
it was around for a while. I don't know if it's still around.
I missed that guy. Yeah, he's gone MIA since B1 June.
He did, and he did a really good video a long time ago now, analyzing what we were planning to do versus the Rex itself, and explaining the potential of all these other projects having the opportunity to launch their own leasing markets, and what that actually practically means. And so he sort of saw early, at least, I think, with that one small subcomponent of the wider model that we've been building out, which is that leasing is actually a small part of it. And there's NFT trading and leasing, there's security token leasing and trading, there's bonds, there's a range of other asset classes. You've got the mint service for deployment of the actual doing your own raises and so on. All of that kind of is then bound together by the checks token itself. And yeah, so but you're right. The big misconception, I think, right now, and even amongst quite a lot of the EOS community who aren't really familiar and haven't taken a look in, is, oh, well, yeah, these guys, it's just a project that got wiped out by the Rex. It must be, right?
I mean, in essence, though, our project was born because of the Rex, right? Because originally we were just doing EOS leasing. And then when the Rex came out and we saw that actually it would take away our main market from us, that's when we decided we needed to pivot. And that led to all of the rest of what we're doing now.
But there's other chains. So, I mean, there's at least probably, like 10 EOS.io chains that I could probably just name off the top of my head. And not all of them implemented the Rex from the start. I don't think Warbly doesn't use the Rex. I don't think Wax uses the Rex. As a matter of fact, William Quigley didn't like the Rex. And now we saw the issues that we've been having since November. Block One pivoted. They have like a 1-year action plan to like phase out the old Rex and get a new resource model. So the people who the blockchain, the EOS.io chains that hesitated on deploying Rex right away, they actually may look smart in the end. But with Chintai, are there plans to deploy the token leasing model on a chain like Wax or Warbly?
Absolutely. Right now on the Kylin testnet, we're testing the EOS leasing markets that we'll be releasing on the EOS mainnet. But that process works exactly the same on the Wax, on Boss, Tellus, any of the normal other EOS.io testnet blockchains. It works the same way. So once we're confident that it works on our testnet and that there are no fatal flaws or bugs in it, and we can deploy it, then the plan is to start deploying it not just on EOS but on all of the other chains as well, because it's no extra work for us to do that, essentially.
It's actually a big reason I had to have you guys on. I was pressured by the Liquid Apps and DAPP network community. Our communities are like so intertwined, but with Chintai and Liquid Apps, it's like we share the same community. And they've been begging and asking, when DAPP leasing market?
Right. So the DAPP leasing market is in testing and development right now. So there's 2 stages to it. The first stage is sort of like the MVP DAPP leasing market. And then the second stage is going to be a more advanced version with a lot more features added to it. And that's going to be coming a couple of weeks after the MVP. The MVP is already on the Kylin testnet, but without a UI. So the UI is being developed and will be being released soon, very soon. I don't want to set a date on it. Yeah, exactly. We had the meeting yesterday, but that's not live yet. Not quite yet.
I didn't see it functioning or anything. I just saw like how it was laid out, the information and stuff. I can't wait for everyone else to get to use it, because right now on DAPP network, there's only one leasing market. So Blockstart has a great leasing market, but you can only rent tokens to basically use Blockstart's DSP. Whereas once you guys launch your marketplace, it's going to allow you to rent and stake to any DSP, which will be interesting.
Yeah, it's going to act as a sort of portal for DSPs in a sense as well. You'll be able to see each of the providers and packages and services that are available.
And so what other marketplace? So you got DAPP in the pipeline. You've got is the Wax and Warbly stuff further in the pipeline, or will DAPP be first?
EOS, Wax, Wobbly, they will be first. They will come before DAPP. The reason for this is that the DAPP market is quite unique in terms of its tokenomics, and it required a different kind of marketplace. So rather than it being your classic order book marketplace, it's going to be very much like the VEX, in that all DAPP lenders will put their DAPP tokens into a large pool of tokens, and borrowers can take from that pool, and we will be generating a DAPP token, we're going to call it, which works exactly the same way that VEX does, in that you can give it back into the Chintai markets to get back your DAPP at a later date. But there's going to be some differences between this and VEX. For example, the DAPP REX tokens are going to be tradable. So that means if you have your DAPP tokens in the Chintai market, and the Chintai market gets completely locked up because all the tokens are being leased out right now, which happens with VEX sometimes, right? Like when the EIDOS thing happened. In that moment, you're stuck for at least 30 days for the duration of a lease before you can get your DAPP tokens back. Or you could trade your DAPP REX tokens to somebody at a premium, and he can get your tokens back 30 days later, but you can have your liquid DAPP right now.
I think that idea, I shared that idea with Ryan back in April, and he liked it. Did he come back from the EOS World Expo in San Fran and was talking about that?
If he did, I don't remember it.
I mean, it's something common in traditional financial markets to be able to do swaps. Like, I was watching. The reason I did that intro with the Max DAPP intro is because I just watched Phil's interview from like a week or two ago on Max DAPP, and you were explaining the bond market, which we're going to get into, and you were talking about how like basically you could be locked into a 10-year bond, but then you could swap it, and maybe David's more interested in the yield, and I just want my money back, and I can get out of the bond. So that's essentially what you're doing here, but with utility tokens, it sounds like.
Exactly.
On the right track here. So yeah, you mentioned how this, for the DAPP leasing market, it's more REX-like, which is different than all of your other markets, which are more, what's it called? The order matching engine, the OMS?
I would call them classic order book markets.
What are you guys doing with your traditional order book markets? I want to get into more of the regulated DEX stuff, because that stuff was when I was researching this, like I love DeFi, and it's interesting that you guys are taking like a regulated approach to DeFi, because traditionally when I think of DeFi, I think of something that just kind of runs itself, like it can't be stopped. Like I would give the example of like MakerDAO, but even that has like centralized controls. So like nothing's at this point, I don't think truly completely decentralized in DeFi. I think the founders and the I guess the people with the most hands-on exert a little bit of control over it. But how does DeFi work in a completely regulated environment? And also, I want to hear more about the D bonds on this.
Can I just say, actually, one of the big things about decentralization is that there's varying degrees of it. And that's one of the nuances I think we're starting as a community gradually in crypto to start appreciating. That, you know, a great example is the difference between proof of work, proof of stake, and DPoS. Right? And you can argue there's varying degrees of centralization versus decentralization, and they have trade-offs. And exactly the same logic applies with things like the design of markets and of an exchange. So by going fully peer-to-peer, for example, as the underlying structure of an exchange, which is possible, you have trade-offs. You lose, for example, certainly in its current state, you lose a degree of comfort from regulators that they can fully oversight the market and ensure that it doesn't become a cesspit for money laundering or whatever, that kind of, you know, nefarious activity, which is ultimately what they're there to try and stop. But you also lose some efficiencies related to how a centralized smart contract can, in theory, also use that to market make, and also for arbitragers to come in and keep efficiency between multiple markets that share the same asset class, that kind of thing. So I only mention that because it feeds into discussions we have with the likes of regulators on what works for them as much as works for all of us. in one sense, you ask me, I'd say let's just go for fully peer-to-peer on everything, right, and decentralize it all down to that level. But it has to be done in a way that regulators are also comfortable with as well. So that's why, with regards to the exchange when it launches, it's still it's decentralized by virtue of the fact that it's completely on chain, everything. But there's still a structural design which is going to look very familiar to people in that it acts as a custodian during the actual moment of the transactions itself. Is that broadly correct, Phil, from your point of view?
That's correct. Yeah.
But that's why it's partly because without that, how do you really clearly evidence transaction activity and control over the transaction activity in a way that regulators aren't necessarily happy with yet? Now, it may well be that we can move it to an even more decentralized form over time. But it's one step at a time with things like this. I think the very fact that we have a regulated exchange coming to the EOS IO community is going to be a big deal, whether they realize it or not yet.
So once this thing launches, so once you get the license, do you guys have the exchanges kind of ready to deploy, or is it you get the license and there's still some work ahead?
So we already have the major part of the swapping, token swapping live on the testnet, and that seems to be working without any issues whatsoever so far. There is an additional aspect that needs to be added and tested, which we haven't done yet, which is the on-chain compliance. So at some point over the next few months, we'll be looking at a smart contract that can store on chain your compliance credentials essentially, and then as a token is swapped, or as you make an order for a trade or whatever it is you're doing, we can then compare your order and your identity against this compliance smart contract and check if what you're doing is allowed or not. This part is still to be done, but to be honest, I don't anticipate any major issues with that side of it. That should be relatively straightforward, I would say. So yeah, fingers crossed, as soon as we're licensed, we're live.
That's awesome. So it's almost like voice launches tomorrow. So we've been talking since B1 June about, you have this voice verified account. It proves that you're a unique ID. This sounds like it could serve a similar purpose. So like someone who's like a finance guy, he doesn't care about voice, but he's using your tools, he gets approved from the compliance. Does that validation for his compliance, could that be used by other applications potentially that would work with you guys to kind of share that compliance? I keep hearing the term a lot from the Warbly guys of compliance as a service. Is that something you guys are trying to do as Chintai also?
Well, that's actually the big service that Amazix Capital, the new owners of Warbly, are focusing pretty much full on right now building out. They need it to get their own clients onboarded onto the Warbly chain and start doing things like security, token issuances, trading activity, all sorts of other things. That's how it's going to happen. You need compliance as a service. So certainly the way Warbly's been designed is for others to leverage off that service too, and indeed for competing services over time to launch on there as well. So we've certainly been proceeding with that, and having had a really good call with their CEO earlier this week, I've got no doubts that they're going to deliver on this. They've actually got the EOS Titan team working pretty much full time on this right now. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely a high quality tech team there behind it, and that are working on this as well.
So how's their compliance stuff work into Chintai for the regulated DEX aspect? Is it the same, one and the same, or are they just completely separate? I'm just reading into this wrong.
No, we have to wait and see, I would say, a little bit, but our intention at this point, I would say, would be to use the compliance as a service provided by Agenix, right?
It's Amazix Capital primarily.
Amazix, sorry. Yeah. That's what I meant. Yeah.
So I know you guys re-released your white paper in January, and you mentioned some of the IBC stuff. You want to be cross-chain with everything in the future. With that compliance aspect, so if that's happening on Warbly, would you be able to have that same compliance once you're verified with your account? Is it in your roadmap to kind of carry that to any chain, or how's that going to look?
So I don't understand how that can fully necessarily work, in the sense that once things are taking place with other chains, you're out of the effective compliance sandbox, right? So so in terms of how we plan to scale, we're definitely looking at leveraging the DAPP network to the full for horizontal scaling. And I mean, Phillip will talk to you and all day about how that potentially is going to work, and that enabled via things like Liquid Link to service other chains. Obviously, some of the applications on Ethereum, for example, a couple of early exploratory chats. They're interested in the principle of it. Obviously, they need to see a working product and something more tangible before they can talk further. But yeah, in theory, you can leverage aspects like identity in theory, but I don't think that necessarily is quite how it fits. I think it is best to look at the Worbly compliance as a service as being an enabler for any kind of financial related market. So we have a tokenized real estate partner who is just about to be announced, actually, for more details on that. That's going to leverage Chintai's merchant network as its back end. And so logically, they need compliance as a service as well for their own client base, because of the inherent nature of the way the real estate industry is regulated too, and it's an investment class in its own right. So again, logically, they will deploy on Worbly as well, and it will be in that side of Chintai. Then, if you get back to the likes of, say, utility tokens being leased and traded and so on, they can take place on multiple other chains, and they don't need necessarily KYC and an AML in place. You can do that in a more conventional sense right now, because there isn't regulatory controls around them in that sense, in the way that we do. We're talking about, really, if you think about with DeFi, we're largely now talking about real world markets and services, and being able to actually bring the benefits of blockchain to them. And to do that, you have to obviously replicate and understand why they're regulated in the first place, which actually the ICO boom kind of nicely showed. Right? Why are IPOs regulated? To kind of stop a bunch of shit scammers coming along and selling you a pipe dream on a white paper.
That's where you'll get him demonetized.
Exactly. Well, he's already demonetized. He swore within 10 seconds. Yeah.
What do you think of the Hester Peirce? I know you're not US based, but what did you think of her proposal for the SEC for the grace period for tokens?
Yeah, I think it's a step in the right direction. I think that there's Wyoming, for example, there's some really good thought leaders in the regulatory blockchain space in the US who are not getting and are necessarily being listened to quite enough at this stage. What you really have is an ongoing battle between, hawks and whatever the equivalent is on the other side of it with regards to regulatory oversight of cryptocurrency. A lot of people in the US in the regulatory and governance side right now see it as a threat rather than an opportunity, and it's trying to ensure that they gradually understand that it's actually damaging the US long term to not participate. You're going to see the likes of China and Asia continuing to pull ahead if they don't enable and free up the entrepreneurs to try and innovate. Right now, a lot of them have just been scared, or you'd be shocked by the number of really good quality, experienced US entrepreneurs who are based out of, for example, London or Hong Kong. And they're there. They've been literally pushed offshore so they could do what they want to do and get on with it. So
yep, that's why it's good that you guys aren't US based, because you had a 1,000-mile head start. And I do like. Sorry,
it's why ultimately though we went for Singapore, because it's a really welcoming regime that's open-minded, and it's not going to sit there and it understands that you need to allow innovation to try and flourish and not just squash it under red tape and unrealistic rules that don't apply to a new asset class, which in some ways this is.
I guess we're talking tokens. Let me reel back in the checks. Let's talk checks token economics. I think that was like the update and the main update in the white paper that was released in January. What's the checks tokens utility? What could you use it for, and how could it be used to earn a passive income?
Okay, so there are several ways that it can be used, and we're always adding more. I'll start with the biggest one. So you have to imagine right now we only have the Boyd market live on the mainnet for leasing, but over time we'll add more and more. And when NFTs go live and so on at the end of the year, you can foresee at some point in the future, we have like 1,000 markets live, right? Or whatever, some huge number. If you wanted to make passive income on those leasing markets without the checks token, you'd have to look at them all, assess which one you wanted to try and make passive income with, buy that token, lease it on that market, hope that the price of that token stays stable or goes up but not go down. At the end of the lease period, you get the token back. It's very risky. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to do this if that's your goal, to make passive income. The checks token is designed to look at all the markets, figure out which one has the highest return on investment, and then it does some clever internal conversion magic to essentially lease on that market as if it were that native token. And that in that way, you get the highest return on investment possible for your checks while it's being leased in this way. Now, that's the first use case, which is called smart matching. There's a second use case linked to the merchant network. So we have a merchant network, and this is allowing anybody to plug into our order management system, and they can earn their own fees for doing so. If you want to be a part of the merchant network, though, you've got to stake some checks tokens. For this, there's going to also be a checks leasing market where you can lease checks as checks. And the great thing is that you can
pay
do both
checks
of those
to lease
things.
checks.
Yeah, I guess so.
That's how the DAPP marketplace. Whenever I was on that call with you guys yesterday, you pay DAPP to rent DAPP, and
Right.
This is the same. You pay checks to rent checks.
Exactly. You'll pay like a small amount of checks to rent the amount of checks you need in order to run your merchant, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're a checks lender, if you have checks and you want to make passive income, you will also be lending it on that market as well. And the great thing is you can do both at the same time. So you can smart match your checks and have it on the checks lending market simultaneously and earn double passive income from it in this way. These are the first two use cases for checks. There will be more use cases coming as we release more and more products. And we have this attitude, basically, whenever we have an idea for a new product, we sit there and say, can we find a good utility for checks in this? For example, we also use it in the automated resource management system we have for reduced fees. So we have fees on the ARM. And if you pay with checks, then the fees are halved relative to EOS, for example.
So like BNB, I think that's the thing most.
Yeah.
Like it saves money by using the native currency rather than like on Binance, it'd be whatever you're trading would get raked with a fee. Cool. Yeah. So I think the value here. So I think a lot of people hear about these rental and leasing markets, and I always hear like the examples of like, oh, I could rent a sword. Like when talking about NFTs, I don't see that as happening super soon. I think the model that you described of why you would need to rent checks instead of own it is the bigger use case. So with the merchant network, to deploy that, you need a minimum amount of checks. Is there a set number right now, or is it?
No, we're figuring it out.
We could just make one up. Let's say 100, because I know that's not how many it would be. So
let's
say
it will be an amount that links to the size and activity of the market, that therefore is in how much it's therefore utilizing the underlying OMS, almost like the capacity of the OMS itself. You're buying capacity in the same way you buy CPU capacity on EOS. Mm-hmm. It's got that kind of parallel. But I mean, the merchant network ultimately is about decentralizing the entire front end of Shintai. So mm-hmm. other businesses can now set up their own exchange, regulated exchange, leasing markets. You could curate your own extra special NFT trading and leasing marketplaces and focus just doing that front end better than everybody else, and not have to worry about building an order management system to do all of that. That's the really where we're at now with this as a concept.
I think the big difference with these rental markets, it's just like if you think of it like real estate, the difference between renting and buying. So let's hypothetically say you need $100,000 of tokens to do something, whether it's the merchant network or what. And then if I had the option to lease those tokens instead at like a 10% interest rate, instead of paying $100,000 upfront, I have to stake $100,000 worth of tokens. I'm subjected to the volatility risk that entire time they're staked. I have the option to pay less than 1%. So less than what would it be? If it was a 10% APR, it'd be like less than
you're like $15,000 a year or something, right?
Yeah.
Instead of 150,000 tied up. And you're right. I mean, what you're doing there is you're saying, and imagine the token price shoots up in a speculative bubble just because the whole market's gone crazy. Suddenly it becomes prohibitively expensive for you to run a merchant marketplace because checks cost a fortune. Or you realize, you know what, this marketplace is great, but the checks that I am holding is now worth a fortune. I'm selling that and out I go. But it's far better decoupling the price like that and be able to say, yep, this is your ongoing running costs, and you're much like somebody who runs a shop, doesn't own the underlying real estate, and that's really the comparison with this as well.
I think it's a more common model. You go out to any business, you go out to whatever your local city is, you go to all the restaurants. I could bet less than 10% of them probably own the real estate that they're operating out of. It just doesn't make sense. You don't need to always own, I guess. So that's why I really see the potential here. Especially, I see it crystal clear for DAPP network, because we see the utility already with what like Blockstart's doing with their rental market. We've seen Rex, we've seen Chintai for over a year now. So that's really exciting. I want to get back. We talked about IBC a little bit back, and now we're talking about the checks token. And we've talked about deploying different pieces of checks or marketplaces on different chains. How does that work with the checks token being used on multiple chains? How's it currently being done? And I guess what's the long-term plans for that?
Okay, so right now it isn't being done because we don't have any other products that aren't on EOS mainnet yet. We have a plan for this, but we're holding our cards close to our chest for now. You'll invite us on again in the future, and I'll tell you all about that one.
Oh man, that was one of the ones I wanted to hear.
Yeah, we have a very exciting plan for that, but
that's usually his way of saying that he and the devs have cooked up something really cool and creative, and they want to just finish it and release it with a bang rather than tell everyone up front.
Yeah, we much prefer to not tell anyone anything and then just release products rather than tell everyone, then realize that something's gone wrong and it's going to take an extra month to finish, and then everyone's saying, when's it coming out? No, much rather happy surprises. But I will tell you about this at some point in the future. Just not yet. We need to think about it a little bit more, but it's very exciting if it works how we think it will.
And it's something we haven't seen before. It's not just like a peg or something simple.
Yeah, it's not something that simple, but it will allow IBC of the checks token across any chain.
Does it use Liquid App or DAPP network at all?
Stop fishing. Huh? I'll tell you later.
All right, I'll let you guys pick the next topic. I think I hit everything I kind of wanted to talk about. I kind of just want to bullshit about some fun stuff. What do you guys think of the voice launch tomorrow?
I wish I could take part.
Oh yeah, Germany. You guys, I forget. Yeah,
well, I can actually. Yeah, because I'm US based now. So yeah, I think they're doing it the right way, as in that I don't think Block One really have a choice with regards to needing to be go the compliant route with this. So they might get a lot of flack initially from this, but if you think about it, what the Libra Association really shows is that if any of the existing social media platforms want to add a, should we say, a token element that has a monetary component to it internally, they're all going to have to take their entire user base and force them to go through KYC AML to participate in that. Otherwise, it becomes a two-tier system of, if you want to monetize, you're going to have to go through this. So the point being, all the other users on other chains will have to do this, or other networks will eventually have to do this, or opt not to. And if they don't, then they're at a competitive disadvantage long-term in theory. So, I think Block One are doing the right thing. They're doing that the right way because they really don't have a choice. But then outside of that, they're doing the right thing to, I think, go with a much more muted launch and focus on a beta and trying to get the user experience right on what they're doing. You want my view? I think they way overhyped it last June. I think that was a mistake. I think they were better off just saying, let's celebrate the 1 year anniversary of the mainnet, maybe announce what we've got coming. They probably overcooked it a bit with hindsight, and they probably would admit that. But that's fine. They're handling it the right way now with a more with a soft launch, and I think it's a good way to do it.
Yeah, there's no big pumps. There's no me doing crazy videos, hyping things up. Like this is how it needs to be. I think this is good. The expectations.
Focus on content and real delivery. Exactly. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. I already said on Twitter I want to do like real focus groups. I hope Block One. I know some of them tune in, so I hope that they can get some honest feedback. I'm going to bring some really great minds on here to kind of really pick it apart. Like we're really not going to be nice about it, but that.
No, I think you're right to do that, because it's actually really good feedback for them early on. You know, I mean, my only feedback so far from a quick look through the tokenomics of Voice is it doesn't really excite me at the moment. But I did say to somebody else, I think part of the reason for that is if I were them, that's because this is the first part of a wider jigsaw puzzle of how you can expand out Voice utility over time as it expands into a suite of, or a network of apps and services and so on and so forth. And then it becomes inherently more exciting. But like the parallel of, right, what's checks used for right now? Well, you can reduce fees. Yeah, but then you've got all these other aspects that will come into play as more and more things come live. I think it's going to be that kind of parallel with the Voice token.
I think so too. I think there's a lot of opportunity. I've mentioned it on here before. I don't know, you guys probably didn't catch it, but I think like paywalled content is a perfect use case for Voice tokens. You get a daily allotment of tokens. You have your favorite sites that you like to go on. The paywall is an easy, great way to spend Voice tokens. And the new CEO of Voice just came from Forbes, and Forbes already has that functionality on Forbes.com right now, where you could pay using Ethereum tokens to get through that paywall. And I think that's a genius idea. And I would be mind blown if that's not part of their plan for just one small piece of the utility of the token, because man, I hate paywalls. I'll do everything to get around them. I hate it too, because I feel dirty about it, because I'm like, man, these journalists should probably get paid, but instead I'm going to open up an incognito window. And if that doesn't work, then I got a VPN. And then if that don't work, I do like a little inspect and I like mess with the code, but there needs to be a better way. So I've been lasering on that as my use case that I want to see, because it's simple, easy to understand. And it's something that I want to support the content I consume, but I'm cheap, man. I'm real cheap.
I'm very excited for Voice though, but not for these reasons, but more for the sort of social impact side of it. Because a few people have tried before to do sort of KYC style social media, but they never really got the network effects they needed in order to make that really work. You need like a huge user base right from the get-go in order to get more people using it and so on. And I think Block One have the ability to do that, even though they're not doing that yet necessarily. But I'm very excited to see, just even out of curiosity, how it will affect online discourse when your name, your real name, and a picture of your face are guaranteed to be connected to everything you say, and you can never get rid of it, right? Like I think the trolls are going to fall away.
I mean, there's pros and cons to all of this, because if you're completely identified, you're almost too polite and too quiet because you're afraid to talk. So
exactly, you can't have a discussion about something that you think might be socially contentious, right? So, like, you know, you could want to have a deep discussion about politics and actually not want that tied back necessarily. You want to make your political points, but you don't necessarily want it being then looked up by your employer and saying, oh, well, you're, you know, especially in the tribalism of the US as an outsider coming, well, you're a Republican, I'm a Democrat, right? I'm not hiring you, or I'm going to fire you because I don't like you support Trump or something, right? I mean, it's almost, you know, at that kind of level. I hope they work out a way of ensuring that you can actually have discourse that doesn't get kind of shut down freedom of speech in one element via the nature of social pressure. Maybe that just requires people to be a hell of a lot more open-minded and accepting of diversity of opinion, right? I don't know.
So like this, I've seen this argument a lot, and I see it kind of as a bit of whataboutery right now, because it really depends on what you think Voice is, right? And like if Voice was trying to be the platform where you can say whatever you want, then you don't need it, because we've got Twitter for that, and people do that on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
So I don't see it as like comparable in that sense. Now maybe they'll expand it at some point to, because obviously there's also, I've seen people talking on Twitter about, like, you know, what about people who want to use something like Voice in countries where, you know, it's completely against the rules to talk about certain topics, right? And where censorship is rife and so on. Like, well, fine, but Voice isn't for these use cases yet, right? For now, it's a place to talk.
I mean, think about it, like countries like Saudi Arabia, where they're like killing people outside of their own country for social discourse in Turkey last year. you have this, they already use social media to kind of like identify that stuff, and they'll put people in jail in certain countries in like the Middle East for that kind of thing. That's using Twitter, which or Facebook or whatever everything they're monitoring, and that's not even like a perfect ID match. Whereas on voice, it's like, or a voice-like platform, it's like, 100% this person is a citizen of your country. Everything they've said. Like it could be dangerous. But I think the thing to remember is, and voice isn't supposed to be everything to everyone.
Exactly.
It's serving a very specific use case. And if everything goes well, it seems like they'll open source the code eventually, and you'll be able to run your own version of voice that doesn't have the KYC, for example. You could have your own social network if you want to have something with different rules or governance. So I think that's something to keep in mind, because I'm seeing a lot of people on Twitter and ES community saying like they're not going to sign up for voice. They think it sucks, but that's because they don't fit in the niche that it's made for. It's made for a very specific use case of identified like social speech. And
but you know what, that's an interesting one, which is that in one sense is one element of its USP. But the big question is going to be, how do they get that critical mass of users to sign up and encourage others to sign up? So I think they need to work out their plan on gamifying this thing and making it really fun. That's important.
I've heard the term voice games or voice it games before from random people. Like I've been at a few like events where I bumped into some B1 people, and like the term voice it games or something with the word games in it, I overheard or was in conversation with it. Yeah. So I don't know what it is. I have no idea. And
that's good. I mean, they got a lot of bright people, so I'm sure they've thought this through.
I hope.
But it's important. I mean, you look at the only two social media networks to break in through, in the last 5 years, it's just slightly over Snapchat and TikTok. And the reason is they were totally different from anything around them. And they were deemed fun by the very young user base that adopted them and drove them up to a critical mass. So the question is, how does voice do an equivalent of that to reach that critical mass and bring them in regardless of KYC?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to take the influencers. I mean, a company the size of Google failed at this. Like, let's not forget Google Plus, everyone. Like, we all had an account too. If you have a Gmail account, you probably had a Google Plus account, but you probably didn't use it.
But what people don't realize is it was actually very good.
It was. It had
Google
some
Plus.
Nice features.
It was really good. Yeah.
Just
it didn't matter. No one was on it. I tried it out and went, "No, this could be really good." Came back and just no one on it.
Yeah. It's only good if all your friends are already there.
Someone in the chat just said, I need a beard. Philip Jones said, Zach needs a beard. Well, the reason I don't have a beard is because my wife will not let me have a beard, guys. She says it is itchy. I am jealous of you two for those wonderful beards.
There is no way we're ever going to hire you then, Zach, the entire team.
I mean, I wish I had one, man. I'm so jealous. Like Peter Kay's got a nice beard. Oh man, who has it? Zane from EOS Radio's got a nice beard. I don't even know what kind of beard I could even grow because I get yelled at once I start getting scruffy. And then also in the chat, Ryan said it'll give us talking about voice. Ryan from Shintai, it'll give us a sense of a roadmap for how you can deploy a large-scale DAPP on EOS.io as well. As a technician yourself, Phil, is this something that you're really looking forward to? Is just seeing like what like an enterprise scale DAPP looks like on EOS.io?
I'm quite curious to see how Block One have built this. It would be great if they do open source it, just to see what their best practices are and stuff, because so far we've not really seen anything like that from anybody, right? Like I don't know what the biggest DAPP is on EOS, but they're all made by startups so far, right? And we all have this startup mentality, so it'd be interesting to compare that to something made by a company like Block One. Yeah.
Well, the question is too, and they must have been looking at the congestion on the network with I wouldn't say horror, but as a useful lesson for them about being over dependent on any single chain as a single point of failure in effect to their architecture. So I'm going to be really curious how they structure this. They were talking about leveraging multiple chains, so I assume they're going to spin some up themselves, and is one going to act as a backup for another? I don't know how this is going to work. I'm just curious. I'm curious about what's going to be going on under the hood. I mean, never mind.
Same.
The front end. Yeah.
But I'm going to need someone like Phil or Peter Kay to explain it to me.
Yeah, not me. Definitely not me.
I'm not going to be the one. I need someone that could translate that to English for me. But I see this as super useful of this, like big, massive use case of where you could use the blockchain, EOS.io in particular, to, I know it's going to be like thousands of people at first, but eventually, I think it's safe to say that if, I don't know, I don't want to throw out speculation, but do you guys, what's a realistic estimate? Let's speculate a little bit. By the end of 2020, how many users will be on voice or voice beta, whatever it may be? What's your over under here? Think we'll hit 1 million?
I would be, well, it depends how long their beta lasts for, right?
So just the end of this year. I guess I don't know if they'll be out of beta. I'm hoping that EOS.io 3 will come out at whatever the equivalent of B1 June is. They haven't announced anything yet, but they announced B1 June last year, right around this same time. I think it was March, actually. They started saying like, June is coming. Like they started like the noise.
Yeah, you saw Bloomer and Novogratz posting all the tweets about it as well, and building some hype. Yeah.
So, I mean, it doesn't take much for that to kick back up, especially with the markets acting the way they are right now. Like, their timing is impeccable, man. They exited during the bull run at the top, sold all that Ethereum, and now they're launching voice right as things are starting to pick up some steam, which means it's going to crash tomorrow to nothing. So this is not advice.
I mean, if I was to guess on your question in terms of numbers, I'd be disappointed if it was only 1 million by the end of the year. I mean, the problem is, and this is a big one. I'm sure they factored in, is they can't rely on the crypto community. Most of them hate Block One. They hate EOS. They're tribal. You know, Ryan told me today he posted some stuff on the Tezos and Tron communities just to let them know that Shinty could help them with some cross-chain services. Got insta-banned.
Yep.
For posting and saying, here's a DAPP that can help your applications, and you know, we need to move beyond this. So I think that really illustrates something for me, which is, being brutally honest, a lot of the rest of that crypto community are going to see it as deeply uncool, right? Because on principle, because it's based on EOS. So you're looking at the existing EOS community, it's not very big. No. So if you take that user base, they have to, and they will, I'm sure, have an onboarding strategy that's going to be looking way beyond crypto. It's got
Absolutely, they have to.
Yeah.
Part of their motto is like bringing blockchain to the masses, right? So they're going to do it in such a way that you don't know that you're using blockchain, I imagine. But I think the number of users they're going to have is going to be heavily dependent on how long the beta lasts. Because if they're doing a slow rollout beta across English countries only, and that takes several months, they're not. I doubt that they'll do much marketing for a product that isn't finished, right? When it's finished, then they're live.
Like, if they if we did a mass rollout marketing plan for EOS right now, could you imagine the shit show, especially with all the micro forks and stuff going on right now, creating the accounts? That brings up a good point. The user onboarding, that's going to be probably the most important part of this voice beta is my sign up process. Do I have to manage a key? I hope not. Like, no. What's that flow like to onboard into this app? How much do I know about the blockchain? And in the back of my mind, could my grandma do this if I handed her the phone and I needed her to sign up instead of me? And without me in her ear telling her what to do, could she do it herself? If they could pull that off, I'm very bullish on Voice's success in comparison to everything else we've seen up until now.
I would be extremely surprised if they didn't have it set up this way.
I like to give them the benefit of the doubt. I think that is the case. But let's roll this back into Chintai. We're talking about getting into regulated markets with your license in Singapore. How do you guys onboard the like traditional finance guy that doesn't know about blockchain, doesn't even care about blockchain? He wants the extra layer of security, maybe, and maybe the lower fees and the extra features and bells and whistles. But how do you onboard him in right now? Like, what's your plans to make that as simple as possible?
Well, I mean, that question, one big one there is that, well, it depends if you're looking at it from the point of view of getting them involved and receptive to utilizing us, or whether you mean at a more technical level, like, so an equivalent of what we've just been talking about, onboarding in the way of onboarding a voice user. Which one are you thinking? Industry participation or like the onboarding experience? I guess
like the onboarding. So are your financial products, your regulated financial products, are they catered more towards regular people or like businesses and like professional, like trading enterprises?
Businesses and professionals. So and that's quite fundamental. So as an industry, the finance industry is very technical. Yeah, I mean, it's used to embracing continuous innovation, and it's used to heavily investing in tech. So on that basis, that's one of the reasons as a sector, it's probably invested more in blockchain so far than any other, because they can see the benefits. So I think there's not a problem there with them being receptive to it. It's about there are others around who are trying to do certain similar things, but they're both fundamentally all based on flawed tech stacks that can't deliver the kind of product they need. And none of them are full trade life cycle, which means that you've got a small component of the overall trade maybe on a chain, but the rest of it still has to be done manually through old legacy systems. So it's going to be getting them to that point of being receptive. Outside of that, though, really what you're referring to almost is business development strategy, right? Which is what is your client acquisition strategy?
Yes.
How do you get them on board? Why should they be involved? How do you sell them on that? And there's a few things on that. One is we've got a compelling case because they can save a lot of money and there's efficiency gains. It's going to be very low cost and easy for them to become active participants on a test net and start participating in the early markets and do some testing. So we're going to make it as a low cost benefit for them as possible, so they really have to find reasons not to get involved. We're going to also make sure in the approaches too, they understand the effectively inherent risks of not participating in disruptive technology. I mean, most of them get it, but also the nature of the types of people will be approaching: challenger banks, bond houses, bond restructurers. They are the sort of smaller players primarily are going to be the uptake first, because they have the most to gain. Whereas the really big players in these sorts of markets, they are the ones that in theory are in a cozy position already and they have less of an incentive. So that's certainly one aspect of how this is all going to flow together. And in terms of just the general onboarding views as well, that's a slightly different one that I don't know if you want to talk about, Philip, or not. But I mean, it's something, again, we're going to, it links into Amazix Capital and the compliance as a service side. And I can say that, having talked to them, their single biggest priority is to massively streamline the onboarding process, so it's extremely quick and efficient and easy, versus what's currently there. So the existing Warbly portal going to be completely upgraded. The onboarding experience is going to be as rapid and seamless as possible. And don't forget, of course, they themselves are an institutional company bringing in their own institutional clients and accredited investors onto this. So that's a useful one for us, because assuming we end up working with them quite closely in different aspects of our services and what they're doing, that's going to bring and drive commercial business our way as well, inherently, off that. So we're feeling pretty bullish about our chances of gaining critical mass. Talking of market launches, right? Same as voice. We're feeling pretty bullish internally about how we approach this, and we're also talking to local resources on the ground to make a hire who's probably Asia-based, Hong Kong, Singapore, with the right kind of background too.
Everyone in the live chat, did you hear that? They always love the speculation and the teases of news. The announcement of the announcement. You guys have a guy, a finance guy, an Asian finance guy that knows the markets and the financial markets of Asia. Looking forward to that. We keep talking about the marketplaces and the market network, or the merchant network. Is the merchant network almost like a franchise, almost like a white labeled version of what you already have built? Sort of.
Like franchising, if you think about what that is, you're taking on a specific brand, and you're taking on a specific set of rules about how you operate to a certain degree standards, like a McDonald's, say. What you can do here is, yes, you can just do something as simple as an embed our existing UI into your site and get a smaller cut of fees. But if you want to actually make some serious money off the markets, you can build your own front end, fully white label with your branding, and curate your own markets from scratch completely instead. So that's not really therefore a franchise. That's a completely separate business. It's just leveraging the underlying OMS and the market making capabilities of it to base the business off. And it has a range of advantages, because apart from anything else, you need, your primary focus as a dev team is you can cut out probably 9-12 months of dev time and all the associated expense. You also you also only have to focus primarily then on the front end devs, as opposed to needing geeky people like Phillip.
Well, we need
the front end devs are also geeky.
Phillip,
that's true.
I can give you a simple example of a good use case for it, right? So the DSPs right now for the DAPP If you wanted to use one of these DSPs and you go to their website to check them out, they could have a simple widget on there that says like, these are our packages. These are the cost of our packages. If you want to have this state right now, click it on the correct button and I will tell you the market price right now. In the background, it's using the Chintai leasing engine, but no one needs to know that, right? And it says, hey, if you pay 10 DAPP, we will stake 100,000, 1,000 DAPP to your account for 1 month or whatever, right? And you don't have to know that Shintai is involved in that whatsoever. And the DSP gets staked to them, and they'll also make a fee on the fact that they have their own UI, which is plugged into our network.
We could take that a step further. Could you build a Bancor relay on top of that and then be able to pay in any currency for the exact same thing you just described?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's interesting.
You could do that. And the other thing is you can sign up your own sub-merchants for markets. So say you curate a particular kind of marketplace of NFTs, for example. You could then sign up merchants who utilize your marketplace and make fees off them as well. Mm-hmm. There's layers to this stuff.
And the better the whole ecosystem does, the better, I guess, the checks token holders do, because it's essentially everything has some sort of, would you call it a revenue share? How do you describe it? Like how the tokens fees?
So ultimately, it's like an ever smaller proportion of fees go back to the underlying, down to the base, which is Chintai itself. Mm-hmm. And merchants can set their own fees too. So they're going to be in continuous competition. In theory, if they get too greedy, they're going to find they have a competition that rapidly sets up and says, right, well, we'll deploy a similar market here and pay half the fees. And that's what you want. You want healthy competition to enable then really what the differentiators become quality of service, the front end and so on and so forth. But yeah, it all links back to checks demand, inherent checks demand, and retirement from supply, and then some reintroduction back related to liquidity services to the network and so on. But we can bore on about that all day.
So with all these merchant networks, as they start popping up, I think one thing we didn't hit on is mint, and that allows you to create your own token issuances. That's so easy. You don't have to do any of the complicated code stuff that Phil probably does in the background here. How's mint work? What are some potential use cases for it? And how do you tie that into these merchant networks we've been talking about?
So the mint service is kind of like a bespoke token issuance service, right? And it kind of depends very much on the people who would like to do a token issuance, what their requirements and needs are. We talk to them on an individual basis. And I can give 2 examples without naming names. So someone comes to us and says, we have real estate. We want to tokenize it. So, but we want you guys to do the technical side. So we would create the correct and appropriate token contract for them. We would set up an ICO format or an auction format token sale. The auction format is what we used for the checks token that was running all of last year. And everyone knows the standard ICO format, pay $10, get X many tokens kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And like they would pick what kind of token issuance format they would want in this sense. We would set up the website for them. We would set up the smart contract for them. We can get this done pretty quickly as long as there's no special requirements that have to be in place. And at the time of their choosing, we can activate it and off they go, and they can start raising their funds. The idea is to save them on all the technical costs that come associated with this. Obviously, it's also going to be compliant when we're talking about security tokens, because this will plug in with our regulated DEX and compliance as a service system from,
Amazing. Not a Gen X.
Amagix. I was afraid to say it then. I was like, which one?
I know, because they're very similar sounding. I know.
Exactly.
So you said you can't name any names. So that means there has been some interest in that, and you're working with at least a couple different companies, probably, without naming names.
Without naming names, yes. We are, I believe, Ryan to confirm, about to formalize one deal. Amazix themselves are actually bringing multiple deals on as well. Again, they haven't gone into specifics with me, and I wouldn't be able to divulge them anyway. And then outside of that, we've had a lot of interest and contact from companies, and most of them, as far as I'm aware, they definitely want to go ahead. What they've realized is that there's a lot more to doing a raise than just doing a raise. You actually have to, have a really good tokenomic model finished, finalized, legally assessed to decide if it's a utility or a security. You need to think about the marketing aspect of this and why, give people reasons why. And once you have that kind of side of the things pointed out to them, they've usually gone, this is awesome. We've realized we've probably got about 4 months of work to do yet before we're ready. And so that's typically what's happened. We've had some really positive conversations, and they've had to go away and just go off and get themselves ready. So we're expecting a good, healthy pipeline. And I think this is also going to feed off itself as once the initial ones go live. It's probably going to be a snowball effect somewhat off the back of that too.
Awesome. I thought I covered everything earlier. That's why we went on that voice tangent for like 10 minutes, but we didn't talk about the automated resource management. And this is something I legitimately want to know more about it anyway. So I guess just give me the overview of it. Like, what is ARM 2.0?
Right. So compared to the original automated resource management, the new one is significantly improved. It's in final testing phase right now. We're just finishing the website side of it. The smart contract side is finished already. And the difference between this ARM2 and ARM1 is primarily related to the fact that now we have this upgrade on EOS.io, which lets the bill first authorizer upgrade. So now dApps can choose to pay for the users, whereas before users always had to pay for themselves. So what this means for the ARM is that from now on, we anticipate it's only going to be used by dApps who will be paying for their users and want to make sure that they never run out of resources to do so. And also it will be used by potentially users of the blockchain who are just heavy users in general and do lots of transfers or bot making or whatever.
What about so I know making. Like Token Pocket has a free like a way to get free transaction like you pay. So it could be tied into a wallet. So Absolutely. They would have to have a way to either charge the user and set limits, or they would have to have a way, if not KYC, a unique identifier. So if they could do that, if they had like a KYC, for example, or use like a voice ID integration, they could say like everyone that's using our wallet gets X, like 10 free transactions per day, and they could have Shintai tapped in on the back end to kind of facilitate that.
Right, and the way that works is you tell us the name of your smart contract or the account which is going to be paying for CPU, right? So let's say Chintai Lease is paying for CPU of its customers, which we will be doing. So we'll add Chintai Lease to the ARM system, and you set limits on the CPU. So I might say, for example, if we fall below 50 milliseconds of CPU available right now, then increase it to 500 milliseconds of CPU. And this will be automated in the background, block by block. So every block will check. It's a cat.
I haven't had a cat appear on a show in a long time.
Every time, every block that comes in, we'll check what the CPU usage in that moment is, and we will. And if, like, for example, let's say EIDOS suddenly gets its second wind, and we have like massive congestion on the network, and we go and Shintai goes from 60% CPU usage to 5,000% CPU usage immediately, right? From one block to the next. Well, in that block, fine, we'll be out of action. The very next block, we'll be back in action, having bought exactly enough EOS from the REX in order to get us to 500 milliseconds of CPU again, right?
All from the Shintai.
And it's all automated. So it's
presumably both, right? It's not just automatically the REX.
Right now, it's automatically the REX because the EOS markets aren't live. That will be something we add in. So in the future, there will be additional features such as, for example, you can set up a limit on how much you're willing to pay, in interest to the REX. And obviously, it will automatically pick the cheaper market, EOS, the REX or Shintai, depending on where you are. And obviously, on some chains, there is no REX, so it will only be using the Shintai market on, for example, Wax, where there is no REX.
I'm excited for that. I'm really excited for Wax. One, because I had great conversation with William Quigley a couple weeks ago. The man has been there, done that, done everything. And also, I know I think the NFT leasing marketplaces is further out than a lot of people would like it to be. Like the leasing of swords, the example everyone gives. But if anyone could do it, I would say it's going to happen on the Wax chain, because they come from op skins. They've lived this and breathed this for years. And they've obviously got experience working with these digital items that have insane valuations. Like, how do you use an item that has like a $50,000 price tag on it? Like it's like unreasonable for most people. So I could see something there. We've been going like an hour now. I'm rambling. I think we talked about everything to come in 2020, but that's usually how I finish, is like, what could everyone look forward to? I know we talked about it all already once, but maybe like, what's out of everything we talked about, like what has you the most excited? What's the most important thing to you? And what are we going to see first out of everything?
That's a big question.
It's a loaded question.
There's so much going on. It's hard.
Yeah, I know.
You guys could break it up, man.
We're not one of these projects with just two things to pick from. We've got about 17.
I know.
I'm most excited for the DAPP bond market. Actually, I think that market's going to be so different and so out there compared to everything else that anyone has seen in blockchain space so far. I think that one's going to be very cool to see go live. Yeah.
And to be clear, what Philip's talking about there is that's a subset of the wider bond market. So you've got the kind of institutional bond market, and you've got bonds intended for smaller companies, DApps, etc., to be able to also issue. So
speaking of bonds, I guess this is an EOS podcast. You guys are an EOS project. Dan Larimer is an EOS guy, EOS.io guy, I guess we'll say. He had the governance proposal with the bond markets, where they had the different voting buckets of like 3 months, all the way up to 10-year lockup periods of your EOS tokens. If that were to get implemented, because that had me really excited, I would definitely put a certain percentage of my tokens in a 10-year lockup. Is that something that eventually shouldn't? It's so hard to talk about because this doesn't even exist yet. There's probably not even a single line of code, but could you see bond swaps if a marketplace like that originated? Like you have a 10-year lockup of EOS. How would you even swap that position? Would you have to like swap the entire account?
The way you do it is you'd have to move it to a custodian account before you staked it, so that was under the control of whoever could do the swap, because otherwise there's no guarantee that the underlying account would ever return it. But in theory, it's doable as a service that could be launched off it. I mean, I think it's more interesting just to sort of discuss it as a governance model, because certainly Daniel's kind of come back with quite a few different ideas, and then you've also got the EOS New York proposal too, which I think is very interesting. I just would like to see some clearer direction with all of this. You know, I'd like to see some sort of foundation that actually helps drive this forwards and helps the community on decision making. I'd like to see a worker proposal fund active and utilizing this huge market cap token to invest back into the chain, because what you're seeing right now, for example, with Tezos, ought to be a wake-up community to the EOS community, which is the reason its market cap is skyrocketing relative to EOS right now, is they've just about, it's a $1 billion STO about to take place on their chain. Well, why is that happening and not on EOS? It's a great question, right? I mean, Tezos was a mess around the time that EOS was getting on and being efficiently built. It was behind on everything. And if you could argue, it's now, in some ways, it's being more effectively run as a chain, as a community in terms of their governance and direction and leadership. I think that should be the wake-up call, if nothing else, is that EOS can't sit back and be complacent, and that there needs to be an embracing of a form of self-organization, decision-making, and particularly a worker proposal system of some sort to invest in the chain and the apps and the people doing. And actually, they can give us some cash for starters. That sounds good.
and I guess this goes without saying, but you guys also, we haven't mentioned it, but EOS 42, you guys are also part of a block producer. Everything you just mentioned is stuff that obviously EOS 42 supports. So vote for them if you're not already.
Yeah, we're just here providing redundancy on the network, but that has value too. So yeah, absolutely.
All right. I don't even know how long we've been going. It's definitely been over an hour. So I think it's a nice place to sign off. I think we dug into some things that haven't been previously discussed. That's why I said I watched the Phil interview. I always try to watch the most recent interview that a project did before I have them on. That way we're not being too redundant, even though all of these topics are super interesting. Is there anything else we missed today?
I don't think so. We covered a lot. It's been a good deep dive. Yeah, it's been really cool.
I think I'm going to be really disappointed here, but we close out the show in a very particular way. Are you guys familiar?
Got me nervous now.
Oh, man. All right. I'm not even going to put you guys through it. We're going to end this. We're going to do a Go EOS on 3. All right. That's how we end these shows. All right. We'll go through. So, all right, guys, I'm here with Chintai. I'm here with Phil. I'm here with David. I'm Zack Gall. This is everything. Yes, this is a terrible close. And then we do a 1, 2, 3.
Go EOS.